All right. Hi, everyone. Dr. Stephen Freiberg here, aka the Dad Anesthesiologist, bringing you another physician father interview. And I'm really excited today. I've got a really cool guest. This is Dr. Jimmy Turner. Dr. Turner is an Assistant Professor of Anesthesiology at Wake Forest University Hospital. He's also the Fellowship Director for the Regional Anesthesia Fellowship. And Dr. Turner wears a lot of hats. He is a blogger, a podcaster, a life coach, and really has taken a huge interest and built an entire portion of his career, not only in regional anesthesia, but in financial advising and financial literacy for really physicians primarily, but a lot of his advice could go toward anyone. But I think it's really great how much he's targeted it toward physicians. We'll get to hear all about his clinical journey as well as all the other great things he's done. So Dr. Jimmy Turner, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Stephen. I'm really excited about this. I think it'll be fun.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I was lucky enough to, I think I stumbled across some of your work and your blog through sort of the White Coat Network. And you obviously have your own blog, which we'll talk more about, but at the Physician Philosopher. And I found all your information regarding sort of life choices and financial planning really helpful. And you and I were lucky enough to connect directly when you were building a course for physicians about this stuff. And I really admire your passion about teaching and transparency. And we've not gotten to meet in person, but you really sound like a stand-up guy. So
I
I'm
appreciate
really
that.
happy to chat with you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about more purely your medical journey. How did you choose to go into medicine, choose anesthesia? Where did you train, and where you end up, and what your practice looks like now?
Yeah, so I think it might actually help people to understand kind of what my personality type is. I recently was introduced to something called an Enneagram, and it's a personality test. So I'd never heard of it before, like, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I took a test recently, and I actually have all my clients for life coaching take it too. And I'm a type 3. So for anybody that's not familiar with it, that's, what's typically called like the achiever.
Okay.
And so like my entire personality and like who I am is based on accomplishments. And I know that sounds just absolutely ridiculous, but it's just the way that I'm wired. And so I'm one of those people that like, I never have to be encouraged to like get started or to do something. Like there's never a moment's like, I'm very decisive. And so whenever people ask me like how I got into medicine, it's always such an awkward conversation. It's like, because I just decided to, like I saw medical care in my household. My dad has, CRPS, got shot in a hunting accident. So I kind of grew up, seeing good healthcare, bad healthcare. And, he's got spinal injuries and all sorts of stuff that's, gone awry since that accident happened 5 years before I was born. And so I saw good medicine and bad medicine, and I just decided I wanted to be a doctor. And I don't really remember like a pivotal moment. Like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I had this one thing where X, Y, or Z happened and it changed my life. And it's like, that was never really my story. I went to college and just kind of wanted to be a doctor. And just have always enjoyed helping people. And so all of those accomplishments, achievements, like things like it's always been with the goal of helping people. And so that's been kind of the common theme. But went to college at a really small school. It's called Erskine. It's in middle South Carolina. No one's ever heard of it. There's like 600 students total. Met my wife there, and we both played soccer. And then I ended up graduating and going to Wake, and I've been there since then. So I did medical school, residency, and in anesthesiology, and then fellowship in regional anesthesia and acute pain, all at Wake. And I've been a faculty member there. This is my 4th year.
So what made you choose anesthesia and then to further specialize in regional anesthesia?
Yeah, so the anesthesia part, I actually had a really hard time making a decision about what to go into. And so what happened is I experienced a lot of things, and I liked a lot of stuff. But what I started to notice is I was really just heading towards the people that I thought were really great physicians. And one day it dawned on me. There's this guy named Brad. I shadowed him between my 1st and 2nd year. And Brad was a great doctor, emergency medicine physician, great doctor. And so I was like, oh, I want to be an ED doc. And it took me 2 years to realize, oh, I could be a really good doctor in a different specialty. Like it didn't have to be ED. And so I started teasing through like what I liked, what I didn't like. I realized I liked hands-on stuff. I liked, making quick decisions. That whole decision-making decisive thing, comes very naturally to me. But I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I ran into one of the chiefs during my 4th year of medical school. He was like, hey, you should totally do an anesthesia rotation and just, I mean, it seems like it'd be the right fit for you. I did it. I loved it. I loved the cerebral aspect of it. It's very intellectual. It's very hands-on, lots of procedures, which, you know, I loved. Played sports growing up, way too many video games. And that probably maybe why I got into regional. It's just regional was always so natural to me. It's like, wait, so I get to hold a needle in one hand and an ultrasound probe in the other and watch a screen. Like I've been doing this since I was 6.
Right.
You know, like this is easy. And so like the first time I put, you know, I did a block on somebody, one of the fellows is like, you need to do a fellowship. And it was just very natural to me.
Sure.
And so actually the hardest thing since that time has not been doing regional anesthesia. It was learning how to teach other people how to do it.
Sure.
You know, and so, but yeah, so I got into anesthesia because of a, you know, coincidental serendipitous conversation, if you will, and then did the rotation, loved it. Um, and, and then I also, what I tell students is, you know, I found a specialty where I love the good aspects of it and I
Mhm.
can put up with the negative aspects because
Right.
that's every field, right? So I love the immediate gratification. I love the 100% compliance from patients. I love, you
Right.
know, I love the procedures. I love being the person that someone calls when someone's dying. Like I like that. You know, I like being the person when I walk in the room, everybody else takes a breath and says, okay, you know, he can fix this.
Right.
I've just, I really like that. And so, yeah, so anesthesia and the regional, I was doing research too. And so I started doing research my CA 2 year, so PGY 3 year, and it was in regional. And so with the procedural aspect, really enjoying that. And then the academic stuff that I was doing, it just kind of made sense.
Sure.
And so I ended up publishing those, you know, those papers like my first year as an attending, but it was from 3 years of work that started when I was a resident. So kind of started my academic journey early.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you've got this robust academic clinical career, and yet you've got a whole other side of you, well, maybe even more than one side, but certainly I think you could at least most easily niche that in the financial literacy and educating physicians about pretty much all things financial and wealth building and financial literacy. Tell us a little bit how that developed.
Yeah. So when I was a fellow, I made tons and tons and tons of financial mistakes in my life. So, and I also saw my parents do the same thing. So they racked up 6 figures of credit card debt. I forbeared on all my student loans when I was in training because it just made it go away. I signed a piece of paper and didn't have to deal with it for a year. Um, you know, financed a car. Like, I mean, like there's just a lot. But I started to become financially literate myself during my fellowship. And when I started reading about it, I have a very transparent personality. Like, you know, you either love me or hate me for it, but like, I wear my heart on my sleeve and I'm the same person around anybody. And so I started talking to my residents and fellows, you know, and just students about money. And I found out very quickly that 2 things. One, they were very interested to talk about it. The
Sure.
second was that they knew next to nothing about it. And this was despite the White Coat Investor and Physician on Fire and all these blogs and podcasts, like wonderful material that's out there, these awesome books that existed. There was still a huge need. So I felt like there was a gap. And I started to notice that gap was just because of a general lack of knowledge in terms of the medical world. And also because we just don't teach it in training.
Sure.
And so 2 things came out of that. The real world stuff, you know, created the Physician Philosopher in November of, what is it, 2017 now, I guess. So almost 3 years old. And that was born out of the need that I saw. And I also saw so many doctors who were trapped in their lifestyles who, you know, had to practice medicine because that's how they afforded their lifestyle. And I recognized that the burnout that was epidemic in our field was so related to your financial freedom. And so I kind of married those 2 ideas, created the blog. And the second thing is the academic portion of it, right? So I run a 4th-year medical student elective or a certificate program, I guess is technically what it's called. That's from January to March. It's 10 weeks. We meet once a week. It's called FLAIR, Financial Literacy and Resilience Education. That started last year. And so 50% of the students signed up last year, 95 of the 140 have signed up this year. And you know, I opened it up a week ago. So, you know, hopefully that will continue. But both those things came from me learning all of my mistakes and realizing that even though you make mistakes, you can still turn it around and get it right and get yourself in the right direction pretty quickly.
Sure. And that's one of the things I think you and I bonded over a bit is I have shared a lot of those mistakes. And as I've come to learn, I'm really not alone in making those mistakes. And
Not at all.
often I think many of us are well-intentioned and we're trying to do the right thing or at least get through medical training, and there's better ways to do it. Or thankfully, at least learning from you, there's ways to fix it. And
Sure.
your advice is so well taken, and the transparency, I think, is one of the things that draws people to you so easily, is because you're very relatable and obviously very knowledgeable.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
So, man, we're going to talk more about that stuff later. But
Okay.
so it's a little bit about your both clinical and, I guess I don't want to call it extracurricular, but extra clinical, because it's not even
Sure.
non-clinical. Makes me think of research. It's
Yeah,
extra
no, you're good.
clinical. Your extra
Me
clinical
too.
work. But tell me now a little bit about your journey as a dad. You mentioned you met your wife in college, and then what?
Yeah, so met my wife in college. We actually knew each other pretty much all 4 years. Started dating junior year, ended up getting married. Like, I don't know. Well, we got engaged about 11 months later, actually. And then it's that decisive thing again. 15 months later, got married. That's because her parents made us wait. And so Kristen is an educator. And so she still works. She still works full time right now. She's only not worked a couple of years during our marriage. When we had our first kid, she took about a year and a half off, but otherwise has been part-time or full-time our entire marriage. It's because she's a passionate educator and she's fantastic at what she does. So we had our first kid. So she was born the last week of my third year of medical school. And then we basically had a kid every 2.5 years after, or 2.5 to 3 years after that. So we have a 9, 6, and 3-year-old now. So girl, boy, girl. And so we got a 4th grader, a 1st grader, and a 3-nager that is hopefully going to be going to kindergarten in a couple of years.
Gotcha. Very cool. And you wear so many hats, and I know a lot of what you talk about is designing a lifestyle and making some of the financial decisions a person makes so you can live the life you want and have the time you want. That all having been said, you do a lot of stuff, and I can't imagine how you fit it all in there. So how do you balance all those hats? How do you manage your time so that you can be an effective clinician, financial guru, if you will, as well as a father and husband? How do you make that work?
Yeah. So for a long time, I didn't. For a long time, I was really bad at it. And so I poured into my blog as a bit of a catharsis. And to be honest with you, it was a struggle. It was hard. And the thing that I struggle with, that I think a lot of doctors struggle with, is an arrival fallacy. So I always kept thinking, like, once X happened, I'll be happy. Once Y happens, we'll be balanced. Once, Z happens, I'll be able to juggle all these balls in the air. And I started to realize that's just a lie. Like, if you aren't happy living the life you currently live, you're never going to be happy. Like, there's not something in your life that's going to just happen and all of a sudden, stress or anxiety or, busyness just goes away.
Right.
And so it's probably only been in the last 6 months. And this is kind of what pushed me into life coaching, is because I got coaching myself and I saw how helpful it was. And I wasn't good at balancing it. So how I do it now, and I feel like I do it pretty well now, whereas for 2 years, I didn't do it well at all, is and this is so funny to explain this on an interview, because I am by nature, my personality, terrible at what I'm about to explain to you. So this is going to sound really great, but this is by no means something I'm natural at. So I have a very, very detailed schedule. So every Sunday, Kristen and I, we sit down and I literally map out what I'm doing from hour to hour during the week, particularly on the weeks like this week where I'm off. So I was on call the last 7 days. And so I'm off this week. I can tell you down to the hour what I'm doing at every moment, from like basically 5 a.m. when I wake up until, 4 p.m. when I go pick up my youngest from daycare. And that sounds really exhausting, but what it actually does is it provides freedom. So I write down everything that I possibly need to do that I can think of on Sunday. It takes 30 minutes. I write down everything. I've got a list of to-do stuff. I write it all down. Talk to Kristen about when her meetings are, because she's working from home right now too. We divvy up stuff. I'm making dinner tonight. I got to go pick up my youngest here in a little while. And I know that that's on there. And so I also know that tomorrow I'm going to make videos for, another project that I have. And so I don't have to worry about like when that's getting done, because it used to totally stress me out that I had all of these things to do. And I also, before I do any of that, schedule the important stuff, right? So when I wake up in the morning, I know I'm going to have my tea. I'm going to have a moment to collect my thoughts, write them down. I do a thought download is what it's called. And then I'm probably going to play chess with my 6-year-old, because he loves playing chess right now. So every morning he wakes up, we play chess, and I have breakfast with him. And then I know that at the end of the day, I'm going to turn things off and be with my wife. And I schedule my workouts first. Like, basically I schedule all the things that matter to me first.
Sure.
So my family time, my workouts, my self-care stuff. And then I plug in everything else and treat it the way that it should be, as a secondary, thing that needs to happen that I want to do, but it's not more important than my family or taking care of myself, because it's not going to matter if I'm not here in 20 years. Right.
Right.
But yeah, so I started doing a schedule, and it's been really, really helpful. It's actually decreased my anxiety. It actually takes me less time. I don't have to sit there when I have free time and be like, what should I do right now with my free time? Like, I know exactly what I'm doing every moment of the day.
Right.
So that all came from coaching, and it's not at all natural to me. I'm not a detail oriented person. I actually, like, if I told myself a year ago that I would be doing this, like, I would laugh at myself. Like, there's no way that Jimmy Turner is going to be writing down a schedule.
Right. No, I
So
mean, it really sounds pretty amazing, especially because I think so often what we, as any professional, but especially physicians, end up doing, all the physician stuff gets crammed in and we're left squeezing in family, self-care, everything else
yep.
in those slots. And I really like the way you approach it in reverse. And the other thing that I think is great, in a really funny analogy, considering a lot of things you've said on your
Yeah.
podcast, it's almost like budgeting.
Yeah.
That
Backwards.
when you budget, or you budget backwards and you assign where your money's going, it sort of creates freedom, as opposed to people finding that stressful. And
Right.
so I think that's a very relatable way to look at it. And even more funny, because I know from your podcast, you are not a big fan of budgeting. So the fact that you've turned into a time budgeter is pretty ironic, but I'm
Yeah.
really glad that it works for you. And I
Yeah.
like all the ideas.
No, it really does. But yeah, it's completely counter to my personality. But I started having tons of anxiety and stress about just all the stuff that I had to do. And it's hilarious because I'm a masochist, right? Like, I'm doing this to myself. I throw all these things on my plate and I have 50 different hats to wear. And the other thing I started doing is I started saying no to a lot of stuff. And I started, backing up on things, like saying, like, look, I know that I've been doing this for a couple of years, but I just can't anymore. But yeah, it's having that detailed, line by line, hour by hour sort of thing it's been really helpful. It also protects me, because what I will do is I will work. You give me free time, I'm getting stuff done. That's just my personality. And so that means that there are no boundaries. So if it's 7 o'clock and I don't have anything to do, like, I'm gonna open up the computer and write a blog post.
Right.
It's just what's gonna happen. And it's like, at some point, that's not healthy. And
Sure.
so I had to start setting boundaries at like 5 o'clock. I'm done, not doing any more work for the day. I'm not working on the weekends except for, on exceptions. And those boundaries have been really, really helpful. And actually, because I have the boundary there, there's no stress.
Sure. I like it. And you probably hit on it a little bit when you said saying no to stuff. Can you tell anyone who, I don't know, anyone who's listening to me that hasn't already found you, but tell us about your hell yes policy.
Yes. So this was an early adoption of what I've continued to learn about all of this stuff, right? So the hell yes policy is essentially learning to say no to anything that doesn't make you say hell yes. And so if there's something that people ask, and this is, particularly for the young faculty that are out there in academics, I don't know, maybe it happens in private practice too, Stephen, you could tell me, but in my world, they're like, oh yeah, hey Jimmy, I understand that you like to write. Why don't you write me a book chapter? And then, like, your name doesn't even like go on the chapter. Like, you barely get credit for it. It's not actually helpful. It takes hours and hours and hours of work, and it's really not helpful for your advancement in academics. It's just like one of the examples are like, hey, there's this committee, you want to be on it? And when you're early in your career, you feel the obligation to say yes, because you want to be helpful to the people that you're around, and like, you have this this drive to kind of prove yourself that you're really you're a team player and a go-getter or whatever. And soon enough, you start saying yes to all that stuff, and you're overwhelmed by a bunch of stuff that you honestly don't want to do. And so I started saying no to things and backing away from stuff. And it's funny because I had major guilt with that, because I'm a people pleaser. That's the other thing about my personality, is that I have a really hard time when I make someone disappointed or upset or whatever. And so I've had to learn to take care of myself so that I can take better care of other people, including my family. And I was realizing that I was saying yes to things that were getting in the way of my other obligations that were much more important to me. So now I only say yes, and people know this, like, they just stopped asking, so like, they came up to me and said, hey, do you want to be the regional fellowship director? And I was like, hell yes. Like, that's something I want to do. I love helping, learners learn. Like, absolutely. I would love to do that. But, if you come up to me and ask me to write a book chapter, like, I'm just going to say, thanks, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm going to pass, and people kind of know that about me now.
Good. Well, thank you for saying hell yes to this interview. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
So tell us, with all your different hats, what is your favorite part about being a clinician? Specifically, we'll talk about just clinician hat of medicine at this point.
Yeah. So if we're talking about clinical practice, I mean, it depends on how I want to define this. Like, favorite procedure, thoracic epidural. Favorite part about actual clinical practice, I think it's working within a team environment. Probably, and that might come from my sports background, but I really enjoy like coming together as a group of people and accomplishing something bigger than yourself. Particularly when things aren't going well.
Mm.
Like it's almost like that, well-defined communication that helps take someone like as close to death as they're going to go before they meet their maker, and then bring them back. I think that's pretty fun, and it involves so many different people on the team in order to do that. And so clinically, it's probably now that's if clinicals excluding teaching, because teaching is by far and away my favorite thing to do.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think that answers that as well. And now, what is your favorite part about the financial hat you've worn and the financial guidance you've been doing?
Yeah, I think that the way that I explain it to people is like when they have that light bulb moment, right? So I love, and this is the same for teaching residents and students. But I just love seeing the light bulb go off and explain something to someone, and then be like, "Never thought about it like that." And then it's not just because the problem with anything knowledge based, right, is I can explain to you what you need to do. Like I can tell you all about, governmental versus non-governmental 457s or backdoor Roth IRAs until I'm blue in the face. And if I don't convince you of why you need to do it, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like you can know everything about how to do it and that it needs to be done. But if I haven't made you a believer in the fact that it needs to be done for you and for your goals, it doesn't matter. And so I love those light bulb moments where you see that not only do they understand what you're saying, but like they get it. Like they actually understand the importance of financial freedom. And more and more and more that happens, with each day. And so I think that the most gratifying experience I've had, honestly, has been the fourth year medical student curriculum that I did. They that thing actually cost me money, and it is just a wonderful experience because it's just one of those situations where you're helping people that honestly they're not really in a position to help you back. And so like you're only doing it because you know that when you were in their shoes, you would have loved to have had that information. Right. And so like seeing that happen and seeing it be really appreciated means a lot to me. And what I told them at the end of the last year is, I said, I thank them because honestly, that's probably the highlight of my academic career so far was running that elective. And so they kind of, in a way, we joke around about living the dream, but they really let me do that. So that's pretty fun.
Very cool. And favorite part about being a dad?
Ooh, I think this one's harder to answer.
Specifically the light bulb. Kids have light bulbs every now and
Oh,
then.
they do have light bulbs. I think that, my favorite part has been as my kids have gotten older and I've been able to,
We've got a different visitor.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, hey, how are you, little man? Hey.
You say hi?
You're cute.
Yeah, he looks like his mom. Thank goodness.
There's hope. But yeah, so I don't know, like as they get older, like you get to have conversations with them and like watch them turn into little people that have personalities and you can see the way their brain works. And they're also like little mirrors. Like you see them do something, you're like, why are you doing? Oh, I do that. You're like, I need to work on that,
Yeah.
And so like, there's accountability there, like I thought I had an idea of how selfish I was. And then I got married and I realized I'm a lot more selfish than I realized. And then I had kids and I realized, gosh, I'm even more selfish than I realized. And so like, they've just continually made me a better person and challenged me and asked me tough questions. And I really enjoy those tough conversations, particularly ones where like, I have to look them in the eye and be like, that's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And, but I mean, obviously the sweet moments and stuff are great too. But I love talking to my kids, honestly, and just learning from them.
I joke at length. I guess she's now recently turned 4, but I still think of her as a three-nager as well.
Yeah.
Very much in the why stage, and just everything continues to why. And I'll find myself in this conversation where finally it's just like, Dylan, because that's what the mitochondrial pathway is. Like, I'm like, how did we end up here? And it's just, either that or just why.
And it comes from your mother.
Right, whether that or, because your dad's dumb, Dylan. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. No, I totally relate.
So we'll flip the script on that a little bit. What do you think is the biggest challenge of clinical medicine currently, or your role in clinical medicine?
Ooh. I think that I'd have to go the route of like, what my writing lends to, which is that a lot of doctors feel like they lack autonomy, and so we work so hard to get to where we are and then find out that we're not the captain of our own ship. And I think that's really difficult, whether that's, bureaucrats or administrators or insurance companies or, whoever. I think that's really tough. And that comes in lots of flavors, whether it's, the electronic medical record system. I mean, like if I had to describe the cause of burnout in medicine in one word, it would be, or I guess three words: lack of autonomy. Right. And so, I think that's honestly the biggest struggle, because there are lots of people that want to fix it, but the system's so big and the machine's so large and there's so many moving pieces that it just seems like an indestructible machine that's set. It's like the clockmaker, like it's just on its path and it's going to go where it goes. And I feel like the doctors, we feel pretty helpless to fix it. Um, and I think that's hard because all we really want to do is take care of people, and a lot of times that big machine gets in the way of that.
Yeah, certainly true. And any physician I'm sure can relate, as we deal with it every day.
Yeah.
What is the biggest challenge or frustration with your role in the financial space?
I think early on it was just kind of getting the message out there. That was actually, I mean, it took 2 years, a year and a half to get any traction at all. So I plugged away, put 20 hours a week into that blog for, basically a year and a half, and with little outcome.
Right.
And so the frustration is what I explained earlier. So I love the light bulb moments, but there are just as many of those as there are moments where someone asks you for information and you provide it and they never act on it.
Mhm.
Right. And so it can be a bit frustrating because sometimes we even get the same email twice.
Right.
Right. Like they ask you a question and you're like, hey, well, first of all, I'm not a financial planner or financial advisor, so I don't give financial advice. But here's the information. Here's what my family does. And I think you need to do what's best for you. And you'll spell it out. I mean, like, write like a 500-word email, and they'll email you back. And basically the gist of it is like more questions. And the reason why isn't because, I mean, they're usually a doctor, like they're smart people. And
Yeah.
so it's not that they don't understand. It's that they just can't get started. They're like, wait, but what you just said, like, that's actually really hard. What do you mean? I have to back off my lifestyle? I have to earn more money? It's like, well, those are only two things you could do, right? You can either earn more or spend less. Like, money is not complicated. If you want to save, you have to do one of those two things. And so, yeah, that's hard. But you can also just work your entire life and never save enough. I mean, that's a third option, I guess.
Right.
Um, and so I think that the frustration comes where you're really trying to help people, and that's why you get into this space, right? Is to help people,
Mhm.
and you'll find out that there's just some people that they just have a hard time applying, the information to get started, and it's not because they don't want to; they're just stuck. They just feel
Right.
stuck. So
Well, and I think what you've helped so many people do is get unstuck and at least get that first step going. So all
thanks, man.
grateful to you for that. And then on our last sort of third category of your hats, what is the biggest challenge about being a dad?
Yeah. So I think that one is just what I said earlier, just seeing myself in a mirror. I I get frustrated at times when I'm doing something, and then I realize that why they're doing that is because Christian or I do it.
Right.
And I'll see them lose their temper, and I'll be like, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, I mean, why do you do it? They're like, that's a good question. And so it's challenging, and I think also I think a lot of parents struggle with autonomy for their kids.
Mhm.
Um, I love autonomy. Like, I give loads and loads and loads of autonomy to my residents, the CRNAs that I work with, to the students. I give loads of autonomy to my kids. And so I don't have a hard time watching them fall on their face, so they can learn from it. I do have a hard time when they fall on their face and they turn that into shame, right? Like it all of a sudden like that's who they are. Like my oldest struggles with math right now. And so she says things like, I'm really stupid. I'm bad at math. And if you slow her down and like you make her, draw it out, or, think about what she's doing and just slow her down a little bit, she's actually really good at math and she actually understands all of it. She's just her dad's daughter and goes too fast at things and makes mistakes. And so I think all of it's fine, but where I really struggle is when like you're trying to help a little person understand that just because you made a mistake doesn't mean you have to internalize it, and that doesn't define who you are. And like they're just not quite old enough to get that. So it's the thing that I love the most about parenting. At the same time, it's the most challenging. Like those conversations, those really tough conversations. I love them, but it's just you can only, maybe it's the stoic in me, but you can only help someone so much. Like it's like the information we give to the doctors with the money stuff, right?
Right.
I can only ask questions and talk to my kids, but I think that it's hard when you see them struggling, and that the answer is not doing it for them. Like
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, I think that's challenging sometimes because you want to do the hard work for them, but ultimately, 10 years from now, it's not going to be what's best for them.
Right. That makes sense. And you and your wife are in a pretty unique position in that you have medical expertise and she has educational expertise.
Yeah.
If you'd be willing to share, because everyone's trying to figure out everything these days, would you be willing to share what you guys have chosen to do from an education standpoint for your kids with everything that's currently going on?
Yeah. So it was kind of an interesting situation. So Wake Forest Baptist is in a bigger county. We actually live in an adjacent county. So it's a 15-minute, 20-minute drive for me to go to work. So my wife works in the same county that Wake is in. She works in this giant county. All of that's virtual.
Okay.
Where we live is a much, much smaller school district. There's like, I don't know, 4 elementary schools for the county.
Uh-huh.
And so it's much, much smaller, much easier to control. It's not as big of a machine like problem medicine has, right?
Right.
And so smaller school. So what happened is for my first grader, they decided because of reading literacy how important it is to have in-person instruction. So he goes to school every day but Wednesday.
Right.
Masks are mandatory. Hand sanitizer and soap are extremely prevalent. They have 8 basically desks that are separated, yada yada yada. My oldest, who's in 4th grade, she goes on Tuesdays and Fridays,
Wow.
and so all the days that they don't go are virtual.
Mhm.
And we'll see, if it lasts or how long it lasts. I think that Chris and I, we're having a conversation about it. I think we were pretty comfortable sending them back. And that's not to say that there's no worry or concern. We certainly are, but at some point we kind of asked ourselves, like, you know at what point would it be okay? And I have friends that are in Forsyth, which is that big county that Wake is in, and they decided to put their kids in private school for the year just so that they could get their kids to have in-school attendance. And there are other parents on the other side that say, like, I'm going to pay the private school and they better not make my kid come, and so I think it's been a tough thing. And I think one of the things that we really wrapped our head around, or Kristen has at least, is the idea that like you just have to do what's best for your family. There's not like, it's a hard decision no matter what you do.
Right.
No matter what you do, there's mom guilt, there's dad guilt, there's concern and worry. And at the end of the day, you just have to make the best decision you can with the information that you have.
Mhm.
And because we live in a very smaller county with a lot less students and a lot less, you know, presumable risk, and the disease burden is much lower in our county, we felt comfortable doing that. But 20 minutes away, I probably would have kept my kid home. So that's what we did.
I think, like you said, the bottom line, I think the overwhelming majority of people are just trying to do the best they can. I'm
Yeah,
sure there's some
100%.
exception of a parent who hates their kid and just trying to bring them to school. But I think that's very much the exception. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine, very similar, at least in some ways, what sounds like what you described,
Yeah,
is they've got basically 3 different setups for their 3 kids just because what
right.
works best for each one. They've got one who I think might just be in either pre-K or daycare that they're sending, I think, 5 days a week because they're
Oh, so our youngest is in daycare too. Yeah.
sure. Because they're comfortable with that situation and the social distancing. And I think their middle one does very well with independent learning and is doing 100% homeschool separate from the virtual learning.
Yeah.
And their third one, I think, does a blend, kind of like virtual, but they also need the structure. And
Yeah. It's tough because, the other thing too is like this is a bit unique, at least with the colleagues that I work with, but my wife and I both work, relatively full time. Right. So
sure.
we both work full time. And so because of that, like I can't not go to work.
Right.
It's not really an option at this point. Technically speaking, I mean, because I love what I do and I don't want to lose that opportunity. Um, and her employer is, basically got to the point where they're about to tell her, like, hey, you have to come on A and B weeks.
Right.
And so you have to come to the office. And she's like, well, I can't do that. Like my kids are on A and B days. So like every week, there's days where they're home. And so if it works out for me to be there, great. Um, but it's gotten to a situation where if we don't send our kids, then one of us has to quit our job.
Wow.
And so because we're both working, it's really it was a really challenging decision, honestly. And so, it's just another wrench that happens to be in our life that, everyone's situation is, like you're saying, different. So that's one of the things that really played into our consideration was Kristen's trying to support teachers do virtual learning, which is, by the way, hilarious. Like we're having this conversation on Zoom right now, and like I'm using a camera and I've got a podcast set up, and like she has teachers that like literally today for an hour, she spent an hour consulting people on how to use Zoom. Like the teacher's like, well, I just like the kids are coming in and they're like, making faces and like putting signs up, and like I don't know how to turn their cameras off, and they're like putting emojis in the comment sections, and like, one person's making inappropriate noises and we can't figure out where it's coming from. And it was just so funny to me because it's like this is the world we live in. And so her job's actually, being a coach. She's actually a coach that coaches teachers, if you will. She helps support them. And so if she doesn't do that, like there are teachers out there that literally can't do what they do.
Right.
So it's the entire situation is just ironic.
Yeah, it's all things I don't think anyone could have imagined or planned for.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
on that note, so if you had to give any person, but I guess perhaps more specifically a physician,
Yeah.
one piece of financial advice in the setting of everything that's going on now, and I know it's not by Tesla because we've spoken about that a little bit, but what would your one piece of financial advice be in the current setting of everything that's going on right now?
Yeah. So I think it's I'm gonna give
Sorry, and I
two
know you don't
because
give financial advice, but
yeah, no, you're good.
you know,
I'm gonna give two actually because I think that they're related. But if you didn't believe before that you need an emergency fund as a physician, I bet you're learning that that's, not true. So, and the flip side to that is that the people that have multiple streams of income are finding out that they have a whole lot less stress than people that are dependent upon their loan salary or income based on their clinical work. And so like I've gone through this entire pandemic, and this isn't like a hey look at me sort of thing, but I've seen the other side of the flip side of this too, and I don't want to call anybody out, but um we've had our 6-month emergency fund, and I have multiple streams of income, and my wife also works, right? So Kristen works, and so because of that, despite all of the things that happen, like we never felt financial stress. And I've talked to so many doctors during this time that have not had that experience. They're 1099, they're having to pay staff for overhead, like they're barely keeping the lights on for their group. Elective procedures go down, and all of their money is spent every month. And I think that emergency fund argument also goes to your businesses. So there are lots of businesses out there that got shut down for 6 weeks, and like they're on the brink of like losing everything. And it's like, well, if you need a 3 to 6 month emergency fund, do you not think that your business probably needs a 3 to 6 month emergency fund to pay your overhead and your staff when, elective cases go to zero? I think that no one probably ever predicted that that was a possibility before all this stuff happened. But it just goes to show how important like preparation and planning is prior to something happening, and to do it when you have a level head about yourself. But yeah, so emergency funds and multiple streams of income provide really very real security and freedom when it comes to finances.
no, I mean, I think that's amazing advice. And I certainly always thought medicine in particular, and even more so in anesthesiology, is a pretty bulletproof career path, right?
Yeah, secure job.
And it's an amazing job. And I think, and Jed Wolpaw often says, I never have to question, does my work have meaning?
Yeah.
Is what I did today, did it make a difference? Because the answer is always yes.
Yep.
But unfortunately, it's still I would argue, a secure job, but bulletproof is not the word I can use anymore.
No.
And I guess if that's one quote unquote good thing to take away from all this is, learning that lesson, albeit I wish there were easier ways to learn it.
Yeah. I don't wish the way that, a lot of people learn that on anyone. But it became a reality very quickly. And now all of a sudden you have people asking about, telemedicine and, real estate investments and, all sorts of other things that maybe didn't broach their mind until their clinical income went to zero.
Right.
And so it's been a challenging year, but I think that like anything else, like we can, live and learn from it. But it's been interesting watching, everybody go through it and reach out and ask questions.
Absolutely. And to finally bring it back to some dad life type stuff, if your kid said to you, either today or when they're a little bit older and might have a little bit more of a logical consideration for it, and said, Dad, Daddy, Big Dog Turner, whatever they call you at home, I want to be a doctor or I want to go into medicine, what would you say, or what would your advice be?
Yeah. I've thought about this. So it's funny because of this other career that I have now with all the entrepreneurial stuff, and I see how valuable that skill set is. Even from a very, very young age, I've taught my kids how to be entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And so they want to buy a toy, right? I don't give my kids, I don't just, unless it's their birthday or Christmas, or I just feel like, giving them a toy because I just want to. But for the most part, like if they see a toy, like immediate gratification sort of thing in the store, I ask them, like, do you have enough money? And they'll be like, no, I don't. Like, you can't get it. And it's the end of the conversation. There's no crying. There's no like falling on the floor. There's no, like, they know how it operates. So we'll get home and they'll be like, hey, so what if I go and put some pine straw down? Will you pay me $10 for that? And I'm like, I'll pay you $5. They're like $7.50, And so like they like negotiate with it. It's hilarious. And so I don't know about medicine. I don't know what I would tell them because they're just so far away from it. I think it's hard because the backfiring of my personality that I mentioned earlier, that decisiveness, I never knew that we had to take a step exam. There were so many things that I didn't know. I just knew I wanted to be a doctor. And the next step was getting into medical school. And then I got to medical school and I found out about USMLE. Like I didn't even know that existed. And so now being on the other side of it, knowing everything that I went through, like, I don't know if I would have done that if I'd known that on the front end. And I don't know. I just think it's a tough question to answer. If my oldest came to me and said, hey, I want to be a doctor, like I wouldn't discourage her from it, but I'm certainly not going to push them into it. And if they do become a doctor, they're going to be, the best entrepreneur, businessman, businesswoman, physician that you've ever met in your life. And they're going to protect themselves and have, tons of leverage and know their value. And they're going to not get walked on by, other people that, tend to do that in medicine. So I don't know. I wouldn't discourage them from it, but I'm not going to actively like say, hey, do you want to be a doctor? And we'll see what happens, I guess.
Fair enough. Well, Jimmy, thanks again so much for chatting with me. I know there's a lot of ways with which people can find you, but tell me, or tell, my 3 listeners or whatever it is, some of the ways they can find you. Some of the ways they can find you on, on either your website or social media or your podcast.
Yeah. So the easiest way to find me is on the physicianphilosopher.com. And then there's the Money Meets Medicine podcast. And I've got, most of my social handles are at TPP_MD. And that includes Peloton. You can find me on there too. I love riding Peloton. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Jimmy, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for chatting with me. And I could talk to you much longer, but want to give you some time with your family, and have a great one. All right.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You take care.
All right. You too.
Say bye-bye.
Bye, buddy.